You did everything right. You provided. You showed up. You were faithful when it would have been easier not to be. You fixed things around the house. You went to work when you did not want to and came home when you would rather have stayed. You were not the man who disappeared. You were not the man who raised his voice or raised his hand. You were not the man your father was, or you were exactly the man your father was and you thought that was enough. You coached the teams and attended the recitals and remembered the anniversaries and tried, in the ways you understood trying, to be what the world told you a good husband looks like. And you are still losing your marriage, or you have already lost it. And nobody has ever given you an explanation that made sense. Because the explanations you have been offered do not fit what you know about yourself. You were not neglectful. You were not absent. You were not cruel. You were good. And you are sitting here watching your marriage fail anyway. And the question that has been living underneath everything else, the one you have not been able to answer no matter how many times you have turned it over in the dark, is why. I am going to answer that question today. My name is Eleanor Voss. This is Still Point Institute. And this video is for the man who did everything right and lost anyway. The man whose goodness was never the problem and whose goodness was, in ways nobody prepared him for, exactly the problem. Stay with me, because what I am about to tell you is going to change how you understand not just your marriage, but every relationship you have ever been in. Before I give you the answer, I need to give you something else first. I need to give you the thing that none of the conversations you have had about your marriage have given you yet, which is this. The failure of your marriage is not evidence that you are a bad man. It is evidence that you were given a bad map. You were handed a set of instructions for how to be a husband that were incomplete at best and actively counterproductive at worst. You followed those instructions faithfully, and the instructions failed you. That is not the same as you failing. And the distinction matters enormously because the man who believes he is fundamentally inadequate cannot learn from what happened. But the man who understands he was working from the wrong map can get a better map and do something different with it. That is what today is about, the better map. Let me start with what the world told you a good husband is, because it is worth naming explicitly so we can look at it clearly and honestly together. The world told you that a good husband provides financially, that his primary obligation to his family is material security, that if the bills are paid and the roof is intact and the children are fed and clothed and educated, he has done his job, that his value in the marriage is measured in what he produces and delivers and maintains. This is the provider model. And it is not wrong exactly. Financial provision matters, material security matters, but it is profoundly incomplete as a definition of what a marriage actually requires from a man. And the husband who optimized entirely for provision while neglecting everything else did not fail to be a good husband. He succeeded at being half a husband. And half, it turns out, is not enough. The world told you that a good husband is faithful, that loyalty is the foundation, that the absence of betrayal constitutes the presence of commitment. And again, this is not wrong. Faithfulness matters deeply, but a woman does not experience a faithful husband who is emotionally absent as a committed partner. She experiences him as a roommate with legal obligations, a person who is present in the house but not present in the marriage. Faithfulness without emotional presence is the floor of a marriage, not the ceiling. And too many good men have confused the floor with the whole building and wondered why the building still felt empty. The world told you that a good husband does not cause problems, that he keeps the peace, that he absorbs conflict rather than creates it, that the measure of a good man in a marriage is how rarely he raises his voice or makes things difficult or adds to the burden that everyone is already carrying. And so you learn to manage, to smooth over, to let things go, to bring the conversation back to calm before it could go somewhere real, to prioritize the absence of conflict over the presence of honesty. And what you built over years of doing this was not a peaceful marriage. It was a pressurized one, because the things that were never said did not disappear. They accumulated in her, in you, in the space between you that kept getting wider without either of you being able to explain why. And the woman on the other side of all that careful management did not experience your conflict avoidance as consideration. She experienced it as distance, as a closed door, as evidence that you were somewhere she could not reach and were not particularly interested in being reached. This is the first and most fundamental thing the good husband map gets wrong. It mistakes the management of a marriage for the inhabiting of one. And those are not the same thing. Managing a marriage means keeping it functional. Inhabiting a marriage means being genuinely present inside it, with your full self, with your fears and your frustrations and your desires and your doubts, with the parts of you that are not useful or reliable or stable, the parts of you that are just human. Most good husbands are excellent at management. Almost none of them were ever taught how to inhabit. Let me tell you about a pattern I watched repeat itself with remarkable consistency across years of clinical work. A man comes in, he is bewildered. He has been a good husband by every metric he knows how to measure. He is not a drinker. He is not a cheater. He is not a screamer. He goes to work. He comes home. He does the things that need doing. He cannot understand why his wife is unhappy or what else she could possibly want from him. He has given her everything he knows how to give. And when I ask him the question that changes the entire conversation, his face does something I came to recognize across hundreds of sessions, a kind of stillness, the look of a man encountering for the first time an idea that reorganizes everything he thought he understood. The question is simple. When did you last tell her something true about yourself that you were afraid to tell her? Not something practical, not something logistical. Something true, something that cost you something to say out loud. Something that required you to be vulnerable in a way that felt genuinely risky. Something that showed her who you actually are, rather than what you are capable of providing. Most of these men could not answer that question, not because they were hiding anything dramatic or shameful, but because they had spent so long being the stable one, the reliable one, the one who did not add to the burden, that they had gradually and completely stopped bringing themselves into the marriage. They were present physically. They were absent in the way that actually matters, the way that makes a person feel that they are sharing their life with a real human being rather than a very competent household manager who happens to sleep in the same bed. Now, I want to give you the 3 specific patterns that I watched end good marriages again and again. Not because the men involved were bad or unloving, but because these patterns, sustained over years, produce a kind of distance that eventually becomes irreversible. Each of these patterns will probably feel familiar. That familiarity is not a verdict, it is information. The first pattern is what I call emotional minimization. This is the habit of making your own inner life smaller so that it does not take up space or create problems or add to a burden that already feels heavy enough. The good husband does not talk about his fears because he does not want to worry her. He does not express his disappointments because he does not want to seem ungrateful for what he has. He does not name his frustrations because he does not want to start an argument that will take hours to resolve and leave both of them exhausted. He does not share the thing that is genuinely troubling him at work because she has enough to deal with, and he is supposed to be the one who handles things. So he compresses himself. He edits himself. He presents to his wife a version of himself that is functional and stable and entirely unthreatening and almost completely unknown. And over time, she stops knowing him, not because he changed, not because he became someone different, but because he was never fully there to begin with. He kept the most human parts of himself in a room she was never invited into. And a woman cannot stay emotionally connected to a man she does not know. Connection requires material. It requires the actual substance of who a person is. Their fears, their longings, their private confusions, the things they find beautiful, and the things they find devastating. The good husband, in his careful management of his own interior life, has been withholding that material for years. And she has been slowly starving for it without either of them understanding what the hunger was. Think about the last time you told her something about yourself that made you feel exposed. Not something that reflected well on you. Something that revealed you. If you cannot remember when that was, you now know something important about where the distance came from. The second pattern is what I call solution substitution. This is the deeply male tendency to respond to emotional needs with practical actions. and it comes from a genuinely loving place. When the person you care about is in pain, you want to fix the pain. That impulse is not wrong, but in the context of a marriage, it consistently produces the opposite of its intended effect. She says she feels lonely and he books a vacation. She says she feels unseen and he buys her something she mentioned wanting. She says she needs more from him and he takes on more of the household tasks, works harder to provide, makes himself more useful in every way he knows how to measure usefulness. And she becomes, if anything, more distant, more frustrated, more convinced that he does not understand her. And he becomes more confused. Because he heard her, he responded, he tried. What else could she possibly want? What she wanted was not a solution. What she wanted was presence in the experience. She wanted him to sit with her in the loneliness rather than remove it. To look at her and actually see her, rather than compensate for not seeing her with a gesture that demonstrates he processed the words without understanding what they meant. To stay in the difficult feeling with her rather than immediately working to make the difficult feeling go away. Solution? Substitution is the love language of a man who was taught that love is demonstrated through action and provision. It is experienced by a woman as evidence that he is uncomfortable with her emotional reality and is trying to manage it rather than meet it. And the accumulation of those experiences, of reaching for connection and receiving a solution instead, is one of the primary drivers of the emotional withdrawal that eventually ends marriages. The next time she tells you something difficult, try something that will feel completely unnatural. Do not fix it. Do not offer a solution or a perspective or a silver lining. Simply say, "That sounds really hard," and then stay in the room with her while she feels it. Nothing else. Just that. And watch what happens to the distance between you. The third pattern is what I call gradual disappearance. This one is the most subtle and the most devastating because it does not feel like a choice while it is happening. It feels like a reasonable response to a situation that has become unreasonable. It is the slow, incremental withdrawal of a man from his own marriage over years, driven not by a decision to leave, but by the accumulated weight of trying and not being met, of reaching and not being received, of giving what he knows how to give and watching it consistently fall short of what she needed. So he stops trying in small ways. He stops initiating the conversations that might lead somewhere difficult. He stops asking about the things he used to ask about because the answers have started to feel like accusations. He stops reaching across the emotional distance because the distance has become so established that reaching across it requires more than he has left at the end of the day. He retreats into his work, his screen, his routines, his private interior life that requires nothing of anyone and delivers the same reliable results every time. And she experiences this gradual disappearance not as a man who is exhausted and struggling and trying to protect himself from more disappointment. She experiences it as a man who has stopped caring, who has voted with his absence for a marriage that no longer exists, who is physically present in the house and emotionally somewhere else entirely, and she responds by beginning her own withdrawal, and the distance between them becomes the permanent weather of the marriage, the climate they both live in without anyone having decided to create it. I want to say something directly to the man who recognizes himself in any of what I have just described. You are not a bad husband. You are a husband who was given an incomplete definition of what a husband is supposed to be and who executed that definition faithfully and found that it was not enough. The failure is not in your effort. It is in the model. The model told you that if you provided and showed up and kept the peace and stayed faithful, you would have a marriage that worked. The model lied, not maliciously, but completely. And I also need to say something harder than that, because this channel exists to give you the truth even when the truth is uncomfortable. Understanding why the model failed does not automatically repair the damage the model caused. The woman on the other side of your emotional minimization and your solution substitution and your gradual disappearance has been accumulating her own responses to those patterns for years. And her responses may have progressed to a point where your new understanding, however genuine, arrives too late to change what she has already privately decided. That is a real possibility. And I am naming it not to take your hope away, but because false hope is more damaging than honest clarity. The man who understands accurately where his marriage actually is can make real decisions about it. The man who is operating on hope that is disconnected from reality cannot. So here is the question that matters right now. Not the question about what happened or whose fault it was or whether the marriage can be saved. Those are questions for later. The question that matters right now is this. Is she still there in any real sense? Not physically, emotionally. Is there still warmth somewhere under the distance? Still moments, even brief ones, of genuine contact between you? Still evidence that the woman you married is present somewhere in the woman you live with, even if she has become very difficult to reach? If yes, the map I have given you today is the beginning of something. The specific things to change are named. The direction is clear. The work is hard and it will feel unnatural and you will get it wrong before you get it right. But the possibility of getting it right is real. If the answer is no, if you are honest with yourself about the answer being no, then the map I have given you today is still the beginning of something, not the beginning of saving this marriage, the beginning of understanding yourself well enough to build something different. To go into whatever comes next with the self-knowledge that most men only acquire after enormous loss and painful honesty, to be a different kind of man in the next chapter of your life than you were in this one. Either way, you now have something you did not have when you clicked on this video. You have the honest answer to the question you have been asking in the dark. Why does a good husband lose his marriage? Because goodness, as the world defined it for him, was never the same thing as presence. And presence is the only currency a marriage cannot survive without. Tonight, I want you to ask yourself one question, not about her and not about the marriage, about you. In the last year of your relationship, how many times did you let her see something real in you? Not something useful, not something competent, something real, something that cost you something to show, something that made you feel exposed rather than capable, something that was true rather than impressive. Your answer to that question tells you more about your marriage than anything she ever said or did or stopped doing. My name is Eleanor Voss. This is Still Point Institute. We will be here every week.